Blog Talk Radio.
Topics include Close Encounters, the United States Law and UFOs, the Federal Register, Title 14, Aeronautics and Space, UFO in South Africa, questions from our reader, Stigmatization, the Wounds of Christ, Roswell Incident, the United States Soldier Shoots Extraterrestrial FIGU Bulletin 3 Translation Close Encounters, by Michael Ida Broke, Canada. Over the last decade there has been an increasing interest in ufology. Numerous movies and television programs have captured the imaginations of millions. E.T., Communion, Aliens, Star Trek, X-Files, just to mention a few, have depicted alien life forms from benign and benevolent to downright nasty. Each year there are thousands of reports of UFO sightings worldwide. Many books are currently available that cover popular topics such as the crop circles, alien abductions, the little grays, government cover-ups, etc. We are being presented with a great deal of information that seems to indicate the existence of extraterrestrial life. Subsequently, we are seeing a growing percentage of people who believe they are real, or at best are willing to consider that possibility. No matter how unsettling or intriguing the thought of a shared universe may be, up until now we have been given very little conclusive evidence. It would seem that for the most part, what we have encountered is nothing more than a hoax, fraud, natural phenomenon, or the product of self-delusion. Yet despite all the false claims, occasionally a case comes along that baffles even the most skeptic of minds. Even more rarely is there a case that provides us with so much physical evidence that one cannot simply discard it without further investigation. One such case is that of Edward Billy Meyer, a Swiss farmer who claims to have taken over 1,000 posed color photographs of saucer-like beam ships, taken film footage of fantastic flight maneuvers on 8 occasions, been given metal samples by the E.T.S. for the specific purpose of scientific analysis, made sound recordings of the unshielded ships, and claims to have ongoing contacts with human beings who say they come from the Pleiades. As can be expected, his story has been met with a great deal of resistance. Debunkers and critics alike have been busily at work for nearly 2 decades trying to expose him. Ridicule and enmity are not strangers to Billy, who, as of 1994, had suffered no less than 13 assassination attempts. Fame could certainly not be his motive. On the other hand, there have been those who have given him the benefit of the doubt and have listened to his story with an open mind. One such person has been the noted scientist, Dr. Marcel Vogel, research chemist for IBM for 22 years, inventor of coating systems for hard disks and a pioneer in liquid crystal displays. Using an electron microscope, he was able to study one of Billy's metal samples, which was said to be a piece from the beam ships, all in the third of 7 stages of processing. In his metallurgical analysis, he was able to determine that it possessed some very unusual properties. Rare elements, including thulium and rhenium, had been bonded together in a non-electrical cold fusion synthesis, a process still unknown on Earth today. He commented, "I cannot explain the metal sample. By any known combination of material I could not put it together myself, as a scientist. With any technology that I know of, we could not achieve this on this planet. Work-intensive analysis by numerous scientists on the metal fragments, sound recordings and photographs coupled along with extensive investigations headed by world-renowned ufologist Lieutenant Colonel Wendell C. Stevens, retired, could not reveal any indications of falsification or fraud. If Billy is who he claims to be, then what is really going on? While some scientists are occupying themselves sending radio messages into the depths of space hoping to get a response, the answer could be right here at our doorstep. According to Billy, he has been in contact with the E.T.S. ever since he was 5 years old. His most important contacts began in the Switzerland, on January 28, 1975, and lasted through until January 28, 1986. As a result of these contacts, much of his physical evidence was acquired. He says he serves as a spokesperson for the Pleiadians and their allies and conveys to us important messages, teachings and warnings by the ETS. He emphasizes the point that it is not his task nor his mission to convince us into believing him. Although Billy Meyer's story sounds like it has the makings for a great Hollywood sci-fi, it also bears an ominous ring. Are we prepared to cross the threshold between fantasy and fact? His slides and photographs are some of the clearest and most astonishing of their kind, sometimes depicting multiple beam ships below the horizon line, or close-ups that are so awesome that a person just cannot help but wonder, what if this is real? The United States Law and UFOs, the Federal Register. In FIGU Bulletin number on the existence of a law in America was briefly mentioned which states that, under certain circumstances, anyone can be punished for having contacts with extraterrestrial intelligences. The law, its interpretations and explanations, dated July 16, 1969, are listed in the Federal Register, Volume 34, number 135, pages 11,961-12,008, Washington, D.C. Some dear friends in America have sent us photocopies of this extensive law, and we are therefore able to publish it here. Take into consideration, however, that the law deals not only with extraterrestrials but other matters too that pertain to Title 14, Aeronautics and Space. Nonetheless, this law states that anyone living in the USA or falling under the jurisdiction of American law, who comes in contact with extraterrestrials without immediately reporting this to the United States Space Agency NASA, is subject to punishment by this law. When the individual does comply with the law, that person is put under quarantine for an indefinite period, which is nothing more than a detainment or an arrest, respectively, for purposes of examination and decontamination from possible harmful bacteria, bacillus, microbes, viruses, through his or her exposure to extraterrestrials who arrived from alien planets or outer space. The official position is that this law serves to protect Earth and its human inhabitants, animals and plants from extraterrestrial diseases and epidemics, which is not necessarily inappropriate by the way. Unofficially, yet secretly, this law allows for the tightest control over anyone who comes in contact with extraterrestrials, and puts a stranglehold on any private relationships of this type. If contacts are already taking place, at best, the law restricts them almost completely or, at worst, thwarts them altogether. The fact that this law actually exists raises the question of why the numerous UFO contactees in USA have not long since disappeared from view and ended up in quarantine, because the Americans are normally not known for their leniency when it comes to someone not abiding by their laws. Mention must also be made in this context that the Americans scrutinize all facts prior to a person's arrest. The contention then is that there exist no authentic contactees among the countless alleged UFO contactees. For this reason, the would-be contactees must now become simply classified as what they truly are, namely, wannabe contactees who have made themselves a big name in UFO circles and among gullible UFO believers. The names Adamski, Bell, Mihalik and many others come to mind here. Here, then, is the law, Title 14, Aeronautics and Space. Chapter 5, National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, Part 1204, Administrative Authority and Jurisdiction. Subsection Number 5, Delegation and Designation. Extraterrestrial Contact. Part 1204.509 has been added and contains the following information. 1204.509 Jurisdiction and Authority. To execute the authority in connection with extraterrestrial contact. A delegation. The Vice Administrator for Manned Spaceflight and the Vice Administrator for Space Science and Application are hereby authorized to execute the administrative responsibility within their specific programs according to Parts 1211.104a of this chapter, which is limited by restrictions in Part 1211 of this chapter. B. Delegation of authority. This authority may possibly be delegated to subordinate official persons with suitable jurisdiction for transferred delegation. C. Reporting. Those persons to whom any jurisdiction in this department has been delegated will ascertain that the administrator is fully informed via the official routing and is up to date on vital activities, problems or other important matters in connection with the delegated jurisdiction. To Payne. Administrator. FR Doc. 69-8474. Submitted on July 15, 1969, 10:56 a.m. Federal Register. Volume 34, No. 135, Wednesday, July 16, 1969. Part 1211.100. Part 1211-Extraterrestrial Exposure. New Part 1211 is added, reading as follows. Secretary 1211.100 Scope. 1211.101 Applicability. 1211.102 Definitions. 1211.103 Authority. 1211.104 Policy. 1211.105 Relationship with Departments of Health, Education, and Welfare and Agriculture. 1211.106 Cooperation with States, Territories, and Possessions. 1211.107 Court or Other Process. 1211.108 Violations. Authority, Seconds 203, 304, 72 Stat. 429, 433, 42 Use. C. 2455, 2456, 2473, 18 Use. C. 799, Art. 9, plus 6337, 18 Use. 2416. Source 34 FR 11975, July 16, 1969, unless otherwise noted. Paragraph 1211.100 Scope. This part establishes a NASA policy, responsibility and authority to guard the Earth against any harmful contamination or adverse changes in its environment resulting from personnel, spacecraft and other property returning to the Earth after landing on or coming within the atmospheric envelope of a celestial body. And b. Security requirements, restrictions and safeguards that are necessary in the interest of the national security. Paragraph 1211.101 Applicability. The provision of this part apply to all NASA manned and unmanned space missions which land on or come within the atmospheric envelope of a celestial body and return to the Earth. Paragraph 1211.102 Definitions. A. NASA and the Administrator mean, respectively, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration and the Administrator of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration or his authorized representative. See paragraph 1204.509 of this chapter. B. Extraterrestrially exposed means the state or condition of any person, property, animal or other form of life or matter whatever, who or which has 1. Touched directly or come within the atmospheric envelope of any other celestial body, or 2. Touched directly or been in close proximity to or been exposed indirectly to any person, property, animal or other form of life or matter who or which has been extraterrestrially exposed by virtue of paragraph B1 of this section. For example, if person or thing touches the surface of the moon, and on as return to the earth, B touches and subsequently C touches B, all of these through C inclusive would be extraterrestrially exposed and B directly, C indirectly. C. Quarantine means the detention, examination and decontamination of any person, property, animal or other form of life or matter whatever that is extraterrestrially exposed and including the apprehension or seizure of such person, property, animal or other form of life or matter whatever. D. Quarantine period means a period of consecutive calendar days as may be established in accordance with paragraph 1211.104 A. United States means the 50 states, the District of Columbia, the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, Guam, American Samoa, and any other territory or possession of the United States, and in a territorial sense all places in waters subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. Paragraph 1211.103 Authority. A Sections 203 and 304 of the National Aeronautics and Space Act of 1958, as amended, 42 Us. C. 2473, 2455 and 2456. B. 18 Us. C. 799. C. Article 9, Outer Space Treaty, Law 6337, 18 Us 2416. D. NASA Management Instructions 1052.90 and 8020.13. Paragraph 1211.104 Policy. A. Administrative Actions. The administrator or his designee as authorized by paragraph 1204.509 of this chapter shall in his discretion 1. Determine the beginning and duration of a quarantine period with respect to any space mission. The quarantine period as it applies to various life forms will be announced. 2. Designate in writing quarantine officers to exercise quarantine authority. 3. Determine that a particular person, property, animal, or other form of life or matter whatever is extraterrestrially exposed and quarantine such person, property, animal, or other form of life or matter whatever. The quarantine may be based only on a determination, with or without the benefit of a hearing, that there is probable cause to believe that such person, property, animal or other form of life or matter whatever is extraterrestrially exposed. 4. Determine within the United States or within vessels or vehicles of the United States the place, boundaries, and rules of operation of necessary quarantine stations. 5. Provide for guard services by contract or otherwise, as may be necessary to maintain security and inviolability of quarantine stations and quarantined persons, property, animals, or other form of life or matter whatever. 6. Provide for the subsistence, health, and welfare of persons quarantined under the provisions of this part. 7. Hold such hearings at such times, in such manner and for such purposes as may be desirable or necessary under this part, including hearings for the purpose of creating a record for use in making any determination under this part, or for the purpose of reviewing any such determination. 8. Cooperate with the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare and the Department of Agriculture in accordance with the provisions of paragraph 1211.105. 9. Take such other actions as may be prudent or necessary and which are consistent with this part. B. Quarantine. 1. During any period of announced quarantine, the property within the posted perimeter of the Lunar Receiving Laboratory at the Manned Spacecraft Center, Houston, Tex. and designated as the NASA Lunar Receiving Laboratory Quarantine Station. 2. Other quarantine stations may be established if determined necessary as provided in paragraph A4 of this section. 3. During any period of announced quarantine, no person shall enter or depart from the limits of any quarantine station without permission of the cognizant NASA quarantine officer. During such period, the posted perimeter of a quarantine station shall be secured by armed guard. 4. Any person who enters the limits of any quarantine station during the quarantine period shall be deemed to have consented to the quarantine of his person if it is determined that he is or has become extraterrestrially exposed. 5. At the earliest practicable time, each person who is quarantined by NASA shall be given a reasonable opportunity to communicate by telephone with legal counsel or other persons of his choice. Paragraph 1211.105 Relationship with Departments of Health, Education, and Welfare and Agriculture. A. If either the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare or the Department of Agriculture exercises its authority to quarantine an extraterrestrially exposed person, property, animal, or other form of life or matter whatever, NASA will, except as provided in paragraph C of this section, not exercise the authority to quarantine that same person, property, animal, or other form of life or matter whatever. In such cases, NASA will offer to these departments the use of the Lunar Receiving Laboratory Quarantine Station and such other service, equipment, personnel, and facilities as may be necessary to ensure an effective quarantine. B. If neither the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare or the Department of Agriculture exercises its quarantine authority, NASA shall exercise the authority to quarantine an extraterrestrially exposed person, property, animal, or other form of life or matter whatever. In such cases, NASA will inform these departments of such quarantine action and, in addition, may request the use of such service, equipment, personnel, and facilities of other federal departments and agencies as may be necessary to ensure an effective quarantine. C. NASA shall quarantine NASA astronauts and other NASA personnel as determined necessary and all NASA property involved in any space mission. Paragraph 1211.106 Cooperation with states, territories, and possessions. Actions taken in accordance with the provisions of this part shall be exercised in cooperation with the applicable authority of any state, territory, possession, or any political subdivision thereof. Paragraph 1211.107 Court or other process. NASA officers and employees are prohibited from discharging from the limits of a quarantine station any quarantined person, property, animal, or other form of life or matter whatever during order or other request, order or demand an announced quarantine period in compliance with a subpoena, show cause of any court or other authority without the prior approval of the General Counsel and the Administrator. B. Where approval to discharge a quarantined person, property, animal, or other form of life or matter whatever in compliance with such a request, order, or demand of any court or other authority is not given, the person to whom it is directed shall, if possible, appear in court or before the other authority and respectfully state his inability to comply, relying for his action upon this paragraph 1211.107. Paragraph 1211.108 Violations. Whoever willfully violates, attempts to violate, or conspires to violate any provision of this part or any regulation or order issued under this part, or who enters or departs from the limits of any quarantine station in disregard of the quarantine rules or regulations, or without permission of the NASA quarantine officer shall be fined not more than $5,000 or imprisoned not more than 1 year, or both. 18 U.S. C. 799. No Executive Panel Advisory Committee closed meeting. Pursuant to the provisions of the Federal Advisory Committee Act, 6 U.S. C. App. 2. Notice is hereby given that the Chief of Naval Operations, NO, Executive Panel Advisory Committee Technology Surprise Task Force will meet February 15 to 16, 1990, from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. each day, in Los Alamos, New Mexico. All sessions will be closed to the public. The purpose of this meeting is to discuss the possibility of unexpected technological breakthroughs that vastly change combat capabilities. The entire agenda of the meeting will consist of discussions of key issues regarding the potential for unexpected technology breakthroughs that could have an acute impact on naval and other military forces. These matters constitute classified information that is specifically kept secret in the interest of national defense and is, in fact, properly classified pursuant to such executive order. Accordingly, the Secretary of the Navy has determined in writing that the public interest requires that all sessions of the meeting be closed to the public because they will be concerned with matters limited in Section 552B, C.1 of Title V, United States Code. For further information concerning this meeting, contact Faye Buckman, Secretary to the NO Executive Panel Advisory Committee, 4402 Ford Avenue, Room 001, Alexandria, Virginia 22302-0208, phone 703-756-1205. Effective date: in light of the Apollo 11 space mission and the need to guard the Earth against extraterrestrial contamination, it is hereby determined that compliance with Section 553 of Title V of the United States Code is impracticable and contrary to the public interest. Therefore, the provisions of this Part 1211 are effective upon publication in the Federal Register. To Payne, Administrator. Fr. Doc 69-8473. Filed, July 15, 1969. 10:56 a.m. UFO in South Africa. At the end of April 95, Mr. Ed D. Muller from Ventersted, South Africa, sent us the following translation of a newspaper clipping which appeared in the Africa Incent Exciting Rapport on April 2, 1995. Alien flying object lands to repair hole in its hull, says farmer. An alien flying object that had the entire region in turmoil this week with its colorful capers in the sky above the northern provinces could easily perform its maneuvers, it seems, even though it was dented and required a major repair job. When a local farmer from Groot Marico in the western Transvaal Plains region first observed the saucer-shaped object on Thursday morning, he noticed that it had a distinctly visible hole in its hull. The farmer, Mr. Jan Pionar, 45, is of the opinion that this vehicle landed on a remote country road between Coligny and Brakesboro to have its damaged hull repaired. However, his arrival probably prompted the vehicle's hasty retreat and rapid ascent into the sky. Mr. Pionar stated that his near head-on collision with the alien flying craft from space was something very extraordinary for him, and that he would not forget this event for the rest of his life. He had difficulty describing the sensation of complete perplexity during his 3-4 minute encounter. Pionar explained, "It was about 8:30 a.m. when I came around a curve in the road and saw a black man shielding his face with his arm as though he wanted to ward off something. At that exact moment the engine of my brand new, small truck stopped. I looked up and saw the most incredible sight. Roughly 80 meters, 240 feet, on the road in front of me stood the huge craft that rested on 3 landing pods. It extended over the entire width of the road and was about 8-9 meters, 24-36 high. The entire unit was translucent and lustrous as though it had been fabricated from a type of stainless steel. It had the form of 2 inverted soup plates with a pudding bowl on top. It appeared as though this upper level had 7 windows or portholes. A red, violet, green, yellow glow emanated from somewhere and illuminated the hull. In the sheen of the light I was able to recognize that the flying craft had problems because there was a dent with a hole of a little less than 2 feet on the seam around the edge. I could not see any beings in the vicinity, only the strange craft, which buzzed like a gigantic electric beater. I got out of my small truck, but suddenly I could not make another step. It was as though a magnet held me on the same spot. I stood like this for 3 to 4 minutes when the craft suddenly rose into the air. First it lifted up like a helicopter high into the sky, then it sped like lightning on a course toward heaven. Mr. Pioneer told us that it took some time before he regained his senses, and when he got into his truck and turned on the ignition, the engine immediately started up again. After this incident he continued to look for the black man whom he had noticed previously because he wondered what had become of him. All he could see were the old man's tailcoats flapping in the wind as he hastily pedaled his bicycle down the dusty road. From a nearby farm, Pioneer called the police and was told that the alien flying object apparently had been observed previously the night before in various locations above the northern provinces. 30 minutes after the phone call, Mr. Pioneer drove back to the spot where he had experienced his incident with the flying craft. This time he was accompanied by Mr. Chap Smith, a farmer from the region. They stopped the truck on the spot where Pioneer had seen the flying object and exited the car. The ground on the landing site was scorching hot to the touch and could have easily burned a person's hand. There was a strange lingering odor in the air, almost like chloroform. The old, black man had disappeared in the meantime, and there was no sign of him anywhere. Questions from our readers. On page 41 of his book Existing Life in the Universe, Billy claims that it is impossible to observe satellites between the hours of 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. at a height of 20-40 km, 12-24 miles, because they do not fly as low as this and because the Earth is situated at this time within the core shadow of the sun's light. An acquaintance of mine had this claim researched by the Max Planck Institute for Astronomy in Heidelberg, Germany, and received the reply that this is incorrect, because the umbra would no longer reach the satellites. They would be visible under all circumstances at this time. Answer: if one examines the statement made by the Max Planck Institute, one comes to the conclusion that this question is either unintentional nonsense to produce an irrational and silly reaction to my book, or else there is a misunderstanding on the part of the individual posing the question, or the Max Planck Institute. Here are the facts. Neither satellites that glow nor those that blink can be seen at heights of 12 to 24 miles, for the simple reason that there are no satellites which orbit the Earth at such low altitudes. Although I am not a space engineer, my general education tells me that satellites fly at a minimum orbital altitude of at least 140 kilometers, 87 miles. Therefore, if the Max Planck Institute is said to claim that one can observe satellites at an altitude of 20-40 kilometers between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., it is an untrue statement against all better knowledge. I believe, therefore, that this reply did not originate with the Max Planck Institute, but with a wannabe informed individual who does not understand the situation yet wants to make himself look important. Billy: why are the FIG books so expensive? Answer: the price for a written FIG material is absolutely appropriate. In fact, when their content and the number of pages are considered, they are as a rule cheaper than other books of the same caliber sold in the bookstores. Hence, the claim that the books are too expensive is unjustified. If FIG members were to calculate all the time and cost involved in compiling each pamphlet and book, they would have to charge a lot more. In general, however, FIG loses money with every book/pamphlet publication because their prices are calculated at self-cost, which, on the whole, then becomes as high as it is because FIG can only produce several hundred, at the most 3,000 copies at a time. This contributes to an increase in the printed material's production costs. Nonetheless, FIGU sells the books at prices that are typically on par with the regular book trade or even lower. Billy: why are the spirit lessons so expensive? Answer: one issue of the spirit lessons comprising 4 teaching letters costs SFR $40.00 plus shipping and handling. All study members know that the entire content of the lessons is coded. This coding is a labor of gigantic proportions, and the time involved for writing and the brainstorming of one issue requires an entire month, thus about 30 days. The production costs of the teaching letters must be calculated as well, because they are extremely high due to the fact that we can print only 500 editions at one time. The time involved for the preparations of an issue for its final stapling takes another 3 to 4 weeks, and is frequently achieved through drudgery until 2 or 3 in the morning, a time when the study members are already sleeping and enjoying sweet dreams, without considering even that what immense financial and labor-intensive requirements lie behind each text. Furthermore, the study members usually do not remember that the core group members can hardly ever enjoy any time off, because the production of texts and books keeps them continuously on the run, even at times when they have to go to their regular job the next morning in order to make a living and furnish money to cover the unpaid expenses of the mission, which the membership fees do not pay for in any manner, shape or form. Billy: why is there such mystery surrounding the spirit lessons, and why cannot everyone simply buy them? Or why are they not sold through printing houses and bookstores? And why is it so important to think during the spirit lessons? Is this more important than making a gut decision? One cannot be enlightened only through thinking. Answer: one of the most important reasons for not making the spirit lessons accessible to simply anyone is the fact that certain individuals, due to their inadequate thinking capabilities, believe the gut can be tapped instead of the brain, and, thereupon, they apparently have the ability to think and act by this reasoning ability. Unfortunately, anyone whose brain has dropped into his or her trousers, even if it did get stuck above the belt, cannot be enlightened, because it is a well-known fact that the gut has neither intelligence nor reasoning powers or judgment, not even among those irresponsible people who surmise that they are capable of thinking and deciding with the gut. The spirit lessons are truly not intended for such people, for the content and knowledge presented within them is too precious to serve as fodder for those who cannot recognize the lesson's true value or bear the required responsibility that comes with them. The spirit lessons are intended for people who have found this path in their quest for the truth from their own, genuine, self-achieved responsibility toward all life. They think with their brains, not from their gut, which has no intelligence, rationale, or reasoning ability. Unfortunately, we of FIGU cannot always avoid mailing printed material, and some incompetent black sheep may gain access to the spirit lessons in spite of our attentiveness and selectiveness, for we are neither all-knowing nor faultless ourselves. And yet, maybe even the black sheep without intelligence should realize that gut decisions are pure nonsense, and that thinking only can advance a person's evolution. Anyone who is unable to think because he possesses insufficient intelligence, reasoning powers and judgment, or refuses to think in order to evolve merely from reasons of egoism, imperiousness, or pure stupidity, must be pitied in every possible way. From ancient times onward, proof has been evident that the thinking process alone, in concert with intelligence, powers of reason and judgment, advanced terrestrial man to his current evolutionary level. Only madmen or fools cannot understand this, for in all likelihood they have failed to encounter the situation. Still, it was not always merely the great thinkers, such as the philosophers and others, who used their brain to think and progress, for the man in the street has done so as well. However, he always had to defend his ideas and thoughts against madmen, fools, and dummies, who hold the pathologically stupid opinion that a person can think and decide from the gut. This breed of human being, the homo mencatus, exists even today, as is demonstrated by the person posing this question, which is intended to be taken deadly serious and not as a joke, according to the reader who sent the letter. Such questions make lengthy explanations redundant as to why the spirit lessons are not sold in bookstores by way of commercial publishing houses. Billy. A reproachful inquiry directed at FIG: what happens to all the money passive group members pay? Answer: this question is actually an outrageous impertinence, considering that each May, at the time of each annual passive group General Assembly, FIG presents, in absolute propriety, the annual tabulation and calculations of the entire monies received and their use, as is demanded by Swiss law. Therefore it is logical that the annual tabulations are checked by 2 tax accountants, and equally logical that an independent trust company monitors the data presented and fills out the forms for the tax authorities so that FIG can pay its taxes and abide by the prescribed letter of the law. In order to fully comply with its duty, FIG publishes the annual tabulations every year in the June edition of the Wassermannszeit, which is distributed throughout the entire FIG domain that consists of Switzerland, Austria, Germany, Russia, Canada, USA, Japan and South America. In other words, throughout the world wherever FIG is known and its material disseminated. For this reason, the above question is an insolent impertinence beyond compare, and it matters little whether it was raised by the fault-finding wife of a passive group member or by the member himself. It does raise the question, however, why this member is a part of FIG in the first place. Billy. One must believe in UFOs and such matters because one cannot verify the authenticity of the claims. Answer: this question-cum statement was generated by the same source as all of the previous questions. The mental attitude of the person raising the question must really be questioned here. Considering the fact that FIG and I have always pointed out that nobody should believe anything, not even from me, Billy. This person undoubtedly does not have both oars in the water. Our teachings state that all human beings must think for themselves and, thus, discover the truth for themselves. This process can only be achieved through the individual's own genuine thinking processes, whereby they find the truth within themselves. To this end, they must activate their intelligence, powers of reason and judgment, and these factors can only be found in the brain, not in the gut with which certain madmen and fools want to think and decide. As is often the case, there is possible concern that such questions are only posed to arouse a provocation, in the belief that through them a person can have contact with the extraterrestrials, because that person is so clever and asks such superintelligent questions, or else because he simply feels predestined for it in his or her own megalomania. This can be gleaned from the last question statement, which asserts that some people are simply repeating, parrot fashion, Billy's statements without knowing anything about them, without having had their own true experiences or anything else to investigate for themselves. Well then, FIG devotees, wherever they may be, know I always insist upon pointing out that people should not simply repeat like a parrot anything I say, but they must ponder these matters, to think for themselves and ultimately come to their own conclusions. Whoever claims the contrary is simply a liar, regardless of who that person may be. Furthermore, humans can only call such knowledge intrinsic after struggling to find it for themselves. This applies also to experiences that may ultimately result from this knowledge, as every student of the spiritual teachings knows who has previously reviewed the pertinent lessons. Once these individuals have experienced their knowledge, they are also able to investigate it. This in turn results in the fact that every human being must gain for him or herself all observations, realizations, insights, all knowledge, all events, experiences and their appropriate scrutiny, because this is the only possible path in which to do so. Stigmatization, the wounds of Christ. The stigmatization phenomenon, during which the wounds of Christ materialize as bleeding wounds on the back and palms of the person's hands, as well as their loins, insteps, possibly also on their forehead, the head, from the crown of thorns, or on their backs, traces from flagellations, is a form of religious sectarian manifestations of self-flagellation based on the psychogenic effect. This signifies that human beings who suffer from a stigma are ensnared in their religious sectarian belief structure to the extent that the psyche rebels into form, whereby the bleeding wounds actually appear on the body and elsewhere. This occurs in the identical manner in which the religious sectarian believer envisioned the wounds of Christ to be, according to the examples presented in countless paintings of saints, along with various representations in Christian churches and so forth. The truthfulness of this statement is demonstrated by the fact that all stigmatized people display these wounds on their hands or the palms of their hands, respectively, just as they were depicted and presented on paintings and statements by the church, albeit they are fundamentally wrong. The fact is, it was extremely uncommon in those days for crucified individuals to be nailed to a cross with 8 to 10 long, handcrafted nails. Such cases were rare indeed because the doomed victims were usually tied to the cross. Nailed individuals, as they were called in those days, were nailed to the cross by their wrists. In other words, no nails were driven through the palms of the victim's hands but always, and without exception, through the wrists only, a fact which was falsified by the churches and all their sects since time immemorial. Paintings and assertions have incorrectly rendered this information, and even the faithful today believe that Emmanuel, who is falsely identified as Jesus Christ, was crucified with nails driven through the palms of his hands. This statement and falsification of facts holds no truth whatsoever, for even with Emmanuel nails were driven through his wrists. This practice of nailing through the wrists was performed because the nailed victim's own body weight, in contrast with those who were tied to the cross, would have ripped them from the Y-shaped structure since the palms and backs of their hands, that is, the hands in general, were too frail to hold the nailed person's weight for any length of time. It also becomes clear that, by way of their psyche and their consciousness, these self-generated wounds of Christ manifest themselves in the same way and in the same place the stigmatized individuals envision them to be, even though the manifestations fail to correspond to the actual truth in any way. Christian religion-influenced stigmatizations must be taken for what they truly are, namely, religious-sectarian Christian materializations of psychogenic origin which influence all material substances. Indeed, they can cause blood to flow upward instead of downward as would be the case according to the laws of physics. Likewise, hammer blows may be observed, indeed heard, as the wounds manifest on the person's hands and feet. The facts are plain and offer proof that physical matter is not the driving force here but, instead, the powers of the consciousness and the spirit, whereby it is not the creational spirit that is at work during stigmatizations, but the individual's material consciousness, in conjunction with the psyche, which generate the fundamental forces within the person. As a rule, stigmatized persons are deeply religious, even sectarian, and they claim that God or the Savior afflicts them with the wounds and pain, so to speak as a token of his love, etc. How bloody a God or Savior it would be who tortures his faithful with such acts. Unfortunately, the religious sectarian delusion of the faith in man knows no bounds, however, and such inadequate, idiotic claims will continue to spread, thereby influencing the faithful and luring them from the path of reason and reality. The following can be said: whoever allows him or herself to be influenced by the religious sectarian nonsense that claims stigmatizations are a gift from God or the Savior is truly beyond help. May rational individuals live in cognizance of the fact that stigmatization is purely the human, psychogenic handiwork of those people who have fallen prey to stigmatization, from which they could liberate themselves if only they were to put aside their religious sectarian thinking and feeling, and live according to bona fide reality. While in their psychogenic condition, strongly stigmatized individuals are also capable of experiencing visions of living in the past, which enable them to register and define actual events from Emmanuel's crucifixion. Furthermore, while in this state, they may be able to accurately describe the local sites, mores and customs from Emmanuel's days. Indeed, they may even have the capability to speak as or other ancient languages, which they achieve through the pertinent Akashic records as well as through the terrestrial, human subconsciousness collective. It is therefore totally erroneous to view all of these matters from a God perspective, as though God had wanted and caused all of this. This unreal view of the world must finally be revised so we may realize that forces are active within man's consciousness, which are quite capable of influencing matter and moving and producing feats termed spiritual even today. Of course, there are spiritual worlds and forces beyond the material realm as well, but anything that transpires on the material plane is influenced, produced and guided by the laws within the material plane, that is, through the level of material consciousness, which has nothing whatsoever to do with the imaginary God, who is praised by the faithful as the Creator, and who truthfully was nothing more than a human being, an extraterrestrial. This God and the material consciousness, which can produce and effect stigmatization and numerous other things, have no direct links whatsoever with the spirit and spiritual powers, let alone creation itself. All of this is based upon the consciousness powers of the material consciousness, and heaven knows that this is nothing mystical, but something that can be entirely explained through reasoning and judgment, although the faithful view all of this differently and compress it into religious, sectarian, mysterious, inexplicable, paranormal and godly aspects. The result is that for them nothing remains realistic or normal any longer, and reality is intended, therefore, to be understood only with the heart and faith, instead of reason and judgment. As I have previously explained, stigmatization is a psychogenic phenomenon induced by a religious-sectarian delusion, whereby the psyche and the consciousness collaborate and trigger the phenomenon. This reaction has nothing to do with autosuggestion in the prevailing sense, but with a religious-sectarian delusional autosuggestion, which normally does not manifest itself externally. It forms within the material consciousness in the depth of the person's unconscious, through religious, delusional beliefs that occur in the conscious, and then transfers itself onto the individual's own unconsciousness as well as the unconsciousness of the psyche, where a delusional dream is produced that wreaks its effects with incredible power in the wakeful state and triggers the stigmatization and delusional visions. These visions may release events and all forms of information with incredible accuracy as though the individual experiencing the vision were standing in the precise location of the event and giving a live report from that vantage point. Billy Roswell Incident. An inquiry, in FIGU Bulletin number on April 95, an article was printed that reports on a film that purportedly confirms the Roswell incident. What should one think of it? Answer. In January 1995, a certain Reg Presley announced during a talk show on British television he had seen a videotape which was copied from an old celluloid movie film. The material was said to contain scenes depicting the removal of fragments of a UFO, which had crashed near Corona, New Mexico, and the autopsy of an extraterrestrial being. So far, the claims are as unverifiable as the video and movie footage. For this reason, I urgently advise you to take this Roswell film information with a grain of salt, and to wait until the shroud of darkness surrounding this matter has lifted, for it is quite possible that the entire scenario is nothing more than a planned, well-organized hoax, which may be based on the private orchestration of an individual person or a private, military or secret service organization's well-planned disinformation scheme. Judging from the way things look up to now, It appears that the entire phenomenon is a disinformation campaign, executed, as are so many other things, by one or several American secret organizations with an objective. Time will probably tell what truly is behind all of this. Billy. Another inquiry. In the USA, a man called Robert Lazar made public appearances and extensively reported on UFOs and dead extraterrestrials he supposedly saw in Area 51 and other areas. What should we think of him? Answer. Here, too, caution is in order because many elements are incorrect regarding his explanations. At least some of his testimonies could be conscious, intentionally guided disinformation based upon data from certain American organizations. An extremely suspicious fact is that Bob Lazar, as the purported holder of secrets, has been left unharmed by the American security and Secret Service agencies when he openly speaks about alleged top-secret information. This is especially strange in America when we consider how harshly this country deals with traitors. However, to this day Lazar remains unharmed in a similar way as the alleged Falcon. The voice of reason dictates that care should be taken regarding the statements and claims made by Robert Lazar just as with statements and claims made by Falcon, the Roswell incident footage and the like. Many mysteries, particularly those pertaining to American UFO matters, must be viewed with great caution. This applies to purported abductions by UFOs, respectively, extraterrestrials, and their brainwashing techniques, as well as alleged animal mutilations by extraterrestrials, etc., which are frequently carried out by certain secret organizations and terrestrial powers of a similar nature and have, truthfully, nothing to do with extraterrestrials. Billy the United States soldier shoots extraterrestrial. On May 13, 1978, around 6:15 p.m., the phone rang in my office. When I picked up the receiver, a strong male voice introduced himself as Frederick Harrington from America. He remarked that he had read much about my story and my contacts with the Pleiadians/Pleiadians. He asked if I would be interested in hearing a story he could verify, one he simply had to tell someone else. He said he was distressed because he was unable to share it with anyone else. He also stated he was afraid, and for this reason he did not want to give me his real name. Normally I am strictly against anonymity, and I told him so, but he pleaded with me and asked me to first listen to his story before rejecting it. I did as he requested, and after a brief conversation, he provided me with the following information after subsequently divulging his real name, which I cannot reveal now for understandable reasons. During the night of January 17 to 18, 1978, on the grounds of Fort Dix, an Army base in New Jersey, where I was stationed as a member of the United States Armed Forces, I observed a guard driving his Jeep while on patrol duty as I was exercising my legs a short distance from the building, the way I frequently did at night. Suddenly I noticed 13 glowing, disc-shaped flying objects quite close to the ground. One of these objects separated itself from the formation and eased downward to earth. It hovered only a few yards above the ground, whereupon a bright, shimmering, multicolored beam dropped down from it. The shimmering light beam seemed to vibrate as a human figure suddenly descended in the beam until it stood on the street. With high beam headlights blazing, the guard sped in his Jeep toward the figure and stopped only a few yards from it. In the headlights I could see that this being had a brownish-gray skin color, and I estimated it to be only about 3*10⁻⁴ tall. It appeared very exotic, but totally peaceful, and was obviously of extraterrestrial origin, just like the UFO above. The being had exceptionally large eyes, very long arms, and an extremely thin body. Somehow I felt terrified, and the guard must have felt the same way. He stared motionless at the alien being, raised his eyes upward toward the UFO, and then glanced at the 12 glowing objects in the sky. Suddenly he jumped from his vehicle, pulled his weapon from its holster, and felled the alien being with 5 shots without a warning, without calling out or without giving any other orders. Bleeding, the being instantly collapsed without a sound, and fell dead to the ground. Immediately after the shots were fired, the UFO sped upward and joined the formation of the 12 other craft, all of which then streaked into the night sky with a strange, buzzing noise. Suddenly the objects were gone. I was totally dumbfounded, and it took me a while before I comprehended everything. I threw myself flat on the ground to hide because several military vehicles with bright headlights were racing toward my location. From my meager hideout I was able to observe how they picked up the dead being, put it into a vehicle and drove off. Then they searched the area while I quickly disappeared. As a member of the U.S. Armed Forces, I was stationed in Fort Dix with the Air National Guard, and I enjoyed wandering around the grounds at night. That's when I had this experience during the night from January 17th to 18th, 1978. I shall never forget it. Billy.